I'm certain that for many of us, we have a love-hate relationship with DLC characters in Smash Ultimate. On one hand, it's simultaneously insane and hilarious for there to be such a vast array of cast members from all genres and franchises coalesced into one title. I, for one, was beyond ecstatic to see Joker, Sephiroth, Pyra, and Mythra brought into Smash. On the other hand, Fighters Pass 1 established a growing concern over DLC fighters intentionally being made broken or overloaded for the sake of accruing more sales, at the expense of the pro scene's competitive spirit. Sadly, Fighters Pass 2 would solidify those concerns. Fortunately though, it would end on a high note. Everyone more or less knew the final one was certainly possible to be added, but with all the intellectual property and trademark bureaucracy the team would have to tread through, it was a pipe dream. I think that by now we can safely ascertain that Sakurai is just built different and can get virtually anyone he wants into Smash. Interestingly, however, unlike the other 5 members of Fighters Pass 2, Sora's debut in the competitive scene was nothing short of underwhelming, and there isn't as much widespread adoption of him into players' character pools across all levels of play. So for today, we're going to dive into why no one plays Sora and if there's a possibility he could see more representation in the future. A good number of you might think it's a little premature to make an episode on a fighter who's only been out for just under a year, but that's actually why I wanted to make an episode on this. Prior to writing this, I was having a conversation with Dabuz on Sora, who I know is going to make a reaction to this. Hi Sam, good to see you again. Anyways, I was motivated to make an episode on Sora mainly due to how different his experience has been so far compared to the rest of his cadre. Min, Steve, Sephiroth, the Aegis, and Kazuya wasted no time making a name for themselves in pro play. Sora's results were a stark contrast though, becoming infamous just like his peers but in a totally different way, perhaps even worse. There were several instances where Sora was fielded by top players and everyone's immediate reaction to it is that they either gave up or it's a copium last-ditch effort to matchup check their opponent. Stuff like that. The meme status of Sora's viability escalated to a point where everyone was cheering on Meister to win a single game on him at SmashCon, and I'd wager it wasn't out of genuine support for him. Not to be cynical, but I think everyone already accepted that Onin was gonna win the whole thing. They just wanted some last-minute amusement.
Well, he told me I looked sad, and I was, but not because of the confetti. It's because I'm pretty sure I'm the first person to lose to Meister Sora in top 8. That's what I was sad about. That's the only reason I was sad.
You're against the Steve, so thank God.
I don't want to be remembered like that.
That actually brings us to the first reason behind his lack of representation, or at least resistance in finding representation. For some odd reason, there's a growing abundance of negative sentiment labeling Sora as a troll pick, potentially influencing prospective players into believing he's a bad character. It may seem silly for that to be one of the core problems, but if you think about it, Smash Ultimate is a game of influence. We've all experienced this before. Whenever you're watching someone use a fighter, you have this urge to want to try them out yourself, especially if their playstyle speaks to you. That applies more so in competitive. Prior to Steve, Rob was one of the most prevalent characters in tournaments, so much so that you would frequently see 5 or more in top 64 at majors. Considering there are almost 90 characters, occupying even 10% of the top 64 lends an enormous amount of credibility to that fighter's performance. The inverse applies just as well. Repeated failures give off a negative impression. When you see someone getting destroyed over and over again, it doesn't exactly make you want to dedicate lots of time and effort into using them, not unless you're only playing them for fun. What's intriguing is that Zachary managed to win Kagadi B5, a super major with over 500 entrants using exclusively Sora, who at the time was out for less than 2 weeks. Some may attribute his brief victory to Zachary as a player and not Sora's own merits, but at the same time it speaks to his potential, and that lets me segue into the parts of his gameplay that make tapping into that potential far more difficult than initially anticipated by many. Fighters Pass 2 consisted of entries with very unorthodox playstyles and mechanics. Min, for example, completely lacks your traditional specials, instead they make use of her other arm. Steve offers a near limitless amount of possibility with his mining and block mechanics. Pyra and Mythra, while straightforward, are effectively 2 entities built into one character, and Kazuya has almost double the number of attacks out of any standard cast member. But in Sakurai's own words, he describes Sora's controls as relatively straightforward, and that's true on a surface level. The bulk of his moveset is rather easy to understand, with the majority of his attacks involving swinging his Keyblade around. And unlike Sephiroth, whose overwhelming effective range is accompanied by varying hitboxes, the need for spacing your attacks isn't as crucial on Sora. At least, that's how it appears. In actuality, Sora may be even more difficult to play than Sephiroth or Pyra and Mythra than everyone once thought. Sora suffers from a huge amount of inconsistency within his kit. There's a lot of nuance to his gameplay that causes him to feel surprisingly incongruous compared to what is expected from a sword fighter. His personal gimmick is the multi-input attacks that make up several parts of its kit. Jab, forward tilt, neutral air, forward air, neutral B, and side B. To better understand how this can be an obstacle for him, let's look at his neutral air. The first hit has him somersaulting forwards with the Keyblade following a circular pattern, which then transitions into an upward strike followed by a downward strike for the third hit. Like other multi-inputs, such as Roy's double-edged dance or Snake's forward tilt, you can decide whether to continue the full string or not. On paper, this works to Sora's advantage, opening up the door to a wide stretch of combos that other swordies could only dream of, but it also leads to a game plan that's somewhat counterintuitive to why most players opt into using a swordie. To account for the need to string together multiple hits in quick succession, combo-reliant characters generally excel in close quarters combat. As long as they're right next to their opponent, they more or less can take care of everything. Sword fighters, their usage of a weapon for their attacks instead of punches or kicks, prefer to focus on mid-range combat, spacing themselves just far enough to where they can successfully deal damage to their opponent without exposing themselves to counterattack. In exchange for their greater effective range, swordies compromise their ability to perform long combo strings, either due to lower hits done across the board, higher knockback scaling, less mobility to keep up with their target, slower frame data, or a combination of them. Not to say that swordies are incapable of performing combos, but they're not as extensive or all-encompassing. In a way, Sora is a sword fighter with the mindset of a combo fighter while still having the base properties of a sword fighter, thus leading to some inconsistencies in his gameplay. Without getting too technical, Sora's hitboxes aren't very conducive towards each other. If we go back to the neutraler example, taking into consideration the differences in position of its disjointed hitboxes, each one has varying levels of hit stun. On screen I have an image that's one of the most egregious visual offenses I've ever witnessed in my entire life. Who the f uses Comic Sans in this day and age? But I'll put up with it for the sake of explanation. Just kidding, Zach, you're awesome. Anyways, each of Sora's Nair 1 hitboxes has different amounts of hit stun, less at the hilt and more at the tip. Depending on which one you land, you either gain access to some combos or lose access to others. More importantly, depending on where Sora is when that strikes or which active frame actually hits, your attacks can straight up fail to connect into each other. It's not that Sora's attacks are broken in the sense that they don't work, but there's a lot more total area his attacks cover than your usual combo fighters, and there's not enough margin for error in all the different areas where his opponent will get hit relative to where he is, or what active frame landed the attack. Ironically, one of his best traits is the abundance of lingering hitboxes, giving off the impression that he's easy to play. Granted, he is. Sora's a very low skill floor, but he also has an incredibly high skill ceiling. The difference between him and other difficult characters, though, is that he's missing the other ancillary properties to take full advantage of his strengths. Sora's a very multi-step character, but like I've explained in previous episodes, multiple steps mean multiple chances to make a mistake or unforced error. Fortunately, combo-heavy fighters have ways to either physically or psychologically pressure their opponent to open and set up those combos so that if they failed once, they can just open a new one again. Mario has Fireball to condition you into shielding. Captain Falcon runs extremely fast. Terry can pressure your shield like there's no tomorrow. What does Sora have? Well, nothing really. In fact, Sora's missing the entire other half of the equation that is needed for a satisfying and effective combo character. To start, his slow and floaty air physics make the game uncomfortable for that kind of playstyle. The two ways you can apply pressure are speed and range, neither of which he excels at. Sora's mobility on the ground is subpar, and he doesn't have the best moveset to contest the majority of the cast on the ground. His aerial game is excellent, but only when he has a positional or situational advantage. Otherwise, he has deceptively poor air-to-ground combat where swordies dominate in Ultimate. His aerials are average in speed. Nair's frame 8, forward air's frame 10, back air's frame 13, up air's 10, down air's 15. Not bad, but not great either. In air-to-air combat, unless he spaces well, he's outmatched. Speaking of range, that's another issue. By and large, he's a swordie, but his attack range doesn't extend adequately enough in relation to his frame data. He has roughly the same coverage as Roy, even though Roy's aerials are significantly faster and stronger. The exception to this is back air, his main spacing tool in neutral, but it's too slow and too unsafe on shield compared to similar back airs. Sephiroth's back air has 2 more frames of startup but overshadows Sora's back air in reach by a wide margin, and its unsafety on shield is made irrelevant on the basis of hardly anyone having the range to punish it if spaced correctly. There's also another element that detracts from his pressure. Since he doesn't move very fast in the air, you have more time to see him coming, and therefore mentally prepare for a response against him than you do other swordies. One of the arguments in defense of Mithra is that her attacks are unsafe on shield. That is a valid statement to make in concept, however, Mithra's unparalleled mobility and fast frame data allow her to get away with it because she can rush you down very quickly. So even if she hits you with down tilt, which is -11 on shield, enough to be punished by a lot of things, not many people have the reaction speed to realize, I just blocked a down tilt, let's do an up smash out of shield, and by the time they realize it, it's already too late. So basically, Sora has a fantastic combo game and can achieve a lot more mileage out of a successful neutral interaction than other swordies, but he doesn't have the means nor the right attributes to create those scenarios. He's not fast on the ground, so you can't abuse dash grab like, say, Captain Falcon. He doesn't have the frame data to mash either on the ground or in the air. He's floaty and slow, weakening the pressure of his landing aerials, and that's of paramount importance for swordies, and his attack range is barely sufficient enough to space well in neutral. The way I see it, he's in a limbo zone. Sora's range is better than melee characters, but worse than most other swordies. His combo game is better than swordies, but worse than melee characters, and his physics don't fit too well into either close or mid-range combat. Ultimately, this forces Sora into an uncompromisingly defensive with punish game plan, relying on his lingering hitboxes in an effort to punish reckless approaches in neutral or frame trap enemies while on disadvantage, in a general format that wouldn't be grounds to low representation. Steve is also give or take an uncompromisingly defensive with punish character. Most of his success is attributed to him taking 40 miles out of an inch you give him, and through mining he can pressure his opponent into approaching and punish them for doing so. To his credit, Sora is not without options to force approaches. His neutral special contains 3 separate attacks with their own distinct functions, 2 of which can be used at a relatively safe distance. And if we combine his floaty nature with long-lasting hitboxes, he can artificially extend his spacing game by drifting back with aerials, and it makes for a decently enjoyable experience to those who have the patience to wait for their opponent to make a mistake. That said, the people who espouse that kind of playstyle are in the minority, and so competition is spread extremely thin. But the video would be 30 minutes long if I went on that tangent. This type of playstyle is very good at not losing, but in gaining that sort of defense, you lose some offense, meaning you're not the best at winning either, winning the old-fashioned way that is. Smash Ultimate naturally favors going second. After all, in a game of rock, paper, scissors, if your opponent chooses their option first, you can just choose the option that beats them. In order to do that, however, you have to make your opponent play rock, paper, scissors, usually against their will. That's what advantage and disadvantage is in a nutshell. You coerce your opponent, or your opponent coerces you into playing rock, paper, scissors. Even with Sora's unimpressive endurance, his amazing recovery and defensive play buys him the time he needs to find those openings. What he lacks is the faculty to bait that aggression. He has all the tools to be successful, and just to lay all doubts to rest, Sora is a good character, but a piece of every puzzle within him is missing, and the Smash community doesn't really care to find them at this point. Sora came out too late. Worse yet, he's arguably the most balanced Fighters Pass 2 character, after being inundated with meta-shattering units like Joker, Terry, Min, Steve, Sephiroth, the Aegis, Kazuya, who all have very threatening mechanics. In contrast, Sora feels ordinary. I'm by no means implying that only fighters with broken or DLC mechanics get played, but Sora was the last of the DLC fighters. At the time he was released, 3 years have elapsed for Smash Ultimate, and while many of us were no doubt very pleased to see one of Smash's most heavily requested characters to finally arrive, there needed to be a practical incentive for players to drop their current mains, who they've likely spent hundreds if not thousands of hours on by then, and pick him up. The meta has undergone a ton of development during these 4 years, and for 99% of us, we've either come to terms with the merits and limitations of our existing mains and are determined to work hard at bringing them to as optimal of a level as humanly possible, such as Light's Fox, Sparkle's Cloud, Gluttony's Wario, or we decided our mains are booty cheeks and went for someone close to the top tier. Cosmos retired Inkling and Corrin for Pyra and Mithra. Riddles used to play Richter and Ken but now runs Terry and Kazuya, and Mars has been entertaining the thought of replacing Zero Suit Samus with Joker. As much as it pains me to say this, for Sora to have had as breakthrough of an entrance as his fellow DLC fighters, he had one of 2 options: be insanely overtuned like the Aegis and Steve, or an expert at a certain niche like Sephiroth. Sora was a victim of poor timing and circumstance. If they wanted to release him as is, it would have been more beneficial if he was in Fighters Pass 1 back when a lot of players were still figuring out who they wanted to main. Better yet, if he was part of the initial wave of newcomers next to Ridley, Inkling, and so on, things would have been way better for him. During my conversation with Buzz, I think he said it the best. Sora is a character who required ample amounts of experimentation and grinding. His inherent unforgiving margin for error, deceptively high skill ceiling, and defensive playstyle makes him a late bloomer, someone whose true value can only be ascertained after a long period of time. You guys remember when Regala was upsetting people left and right at SmashCon this past August, right? Or how Big D got second at Get On My Level with Ice Climbers, or how Sumosuto got third at My Suma Top 9 with Dr. Mario. We're seeing a lot of players fielding obscure mid and low tiers and taking sets off of top players, but they had way more time to limit test and theory craft with those 3. Sora needs that same amount of time. I understand it may have been out of Sakura's hands. Heaven knows how difficult copyright and trademark negotiations must have been with Disney, but Sora should not have been the last DLC fighter to be added. It might take months or years before Sora collects enough empirical data to be optimized, but people don't want to wait that long, especially with how the other DLC fighters can be made tournament usable only a few weeks after being picked up. Yes, Zachary took a major with only Sora despite being out for less than 2 weeks, but that's one instance, and besides, the kid is cracked. I like to see Sora perform better in competitive play though, but it's gonna take a lot of damn work. But hopefully not too long. Anyways, that's it for today. If you guys enjoyed the video, it would be awesome if you gave it a like and subscribed. Consider following me on Twitter at Vars, joining my Discord server, and checking out my other Why No One Plays episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.